Thanks everyone for coming. This is our virtual DC meetup. We had our first in-person one about a month and a half ago, and we're looking to have another one in May. So keep an eye out for details for that. Today we've got Suhan and Samir Parulkar here talking about API security, doing their same talk that they did at TDX. So we're glad we've got the chance to hear this, and I'll let them take it away.
Awesome, Ben. All right, let's get started. Hey, hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining in today. I see many people from different places, including folks joining international. So I think this topic is definitely uh, exciting for many people. Me and Sue, we presented that at the Salesforce Trailblazer TDX event, and we got a good response. So hopefully we can you also enjoy the session. So let's get started. Um, so what we're going to talk about today is about API security, the three keys to protect your digital estate. And the way I would kind of like to frame that is, when you think about APIs, we've been using APIs for many years. The role of APIs has changed quite a lot. APIs in turn deliver digital experiences, engaging services, differentiated services, and the number of APIs are increasing, right? You probably are seeing that in your own environment today, in your own usage today. Um, but what is also happening is, as the number of APIs are increasing, so are the API vulnerabilities, leading to customer dissatisfaction, and most importantly, losing customer trust. That's the biggest challenge, right? Losing customer trust. So what we're going to talk about, that's going to be our topic for today. And we're going to talk about how MuleSoft can help you to protect your APIs with the different sets of capabilities that we offer. So that's going to be what we're going to talk about. Quick intro about me, Samir Parulkar, product marketing here at Salesforce, focusing on MuleSoft API management products. And I'm joined today by Sue. Sue, do you want to just a quick intro?
Yeah. So my name is Su Xiao, and I'm a technical product marketing manager for Salesforce, and I focus on API management for MuleSoft. So yeah, back to you, Samir.
All right, awesome. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to tag team me and Sue. I'm going to first initially kind of like talk about the challenge, talk about like the different capabilities and that we at MuleSoft we offer to help. And then Sue is going to actually show you the demonstration of the products, right? The different best practices that we're going to talk about. All right. So let's get started. So before we begin, quick safe harbor or forward-looking statement. We'll talk about few upcoming products and capabilities, but make your purchasing decision on the products that are available today. With that, let's get started. So, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, right, we're seeing APIs for many years. APIs have become even more ubiquitous and versatile. We started with APIs with typically for SaaS-based communication or integration, but over a period of time, over many years, the role of APIs have changed to, on one hand, to deliver technical initiatives like, say, IoT, or sorry, event-driven architecture or microservices, or also business initiatives like IoT or API ecosystems and much more than that, right? So we're seeing that, see, look at the graph, like, you had APIs earlier for certain specific use cases, and now the role of APIs actually has changed quite a lot, right? Even take a look at any digital experience today, right? A mobile experience this oftentimes like we are like so familiar with, like we don't really consider that as anything new to nowadays. It's all powered by APIs behind the scene, right? You take like when you look at Uber app or like or ride sharing app or any other type of app, that entire app experience is delivered via APIs. I mean, we know about this, right? So what is happening is the role of APIs is changing. The importance of APIs, the APIs are becoming even more important to deliver that business value, right? But what is also happening is, with the now number of increase in the use of APIs, API security incidents are also on the rise, right? take the example of the companies you see on the screen, right? If you're part of any of these companies, and if you had to basically turn back the clock and looked at your API infrastructure, you would have thought like, oh my God, we should have done this in a bit different way, right? And this happens all the time. We're seeing increasing occurrence of this happening all the time. A good example is what happened at T-Mobile. And that's a much more of a recent use case where of a data breach at T-Mobile, where an API was compromised and compromised by bad actor. And what happened is that API was designed to share customer information, and unfortunately, it shared information like customer name, address, phone number, and some other details. Now, T-Mobile did implement some security measures. So sensitive information like say social security or billing information was not compromised, which is great, which is good. But at the same time, if I was a customer of T-Mobile and I am a customer of T-Mobile, I'm actually not happy that my information was compromised. That is actually heart of the issue with API security, right? We've seen this off and on, right? Similar thing happened with Optus, a telecommunication company in Australia, where they had an API which they didn't even know that API existed, which shared a lot of sensitive information, and that somebody found that API on the web and started using it to basically compromise data. Now, this happens all the time, and this is kind of like the biggest issue we are seeing today, as APIs are becoming a gateway to your sensitive data. But at the same time as that is happening, the threat for APIs is also increasing. So what are some of the key challenges of securing that APIs, right? And then there are multiple of these challenges. I'm going to kind of like talk about like four here, right? On one hand, there is an increase in the number of APIs attack surface area. So as I said earlier, as more APIs are being developed to again support your business use cases, technical use cases, there is an increase in the attack surface area for APIs in itself, right? Second, what's happening is APIs in turn are sprawling across a fragmented landscape, right? So for example, um, a latest data point is 30% on an average, 30% more third-party APIs, more third-party APIs are being used. It will be used in 2025, up from 10% in 2021. Now, what's going to happen is, as you're going to use more of this different types of third-party APIs, what are the security implications of that? So that's actually increasingly challenging. Another aspect is, right, standardization of APIs across your organization is a big challenge, right? Now you're going to use APIs through your different teams, and how do you standardize them? And another one is the API usage itself is fragmented across different API platforms. I'm sure some of you are using multiple API gateways, right? So how do you make sure that the API access is standardized across all these platforms? So these are some of the key challenges to just think about securing your APIs in the first place, right? So where do you start now? Considering on one hand you have this business challenges, you have security incidents that are increasing. So I kind of like mentioned about some of the challenges, right? So kind of like where do you start then in this scenario, right? And couple of areas that we feel are important is first, you need to manage the API sprawl, right? You need to increase visibility into all APIs across your organization, not only the APIs that you're developing, but also the APIs that you're using. Second is you want to standardize the API access. So, you need proactive governance and risk assessment across your APIs, right? What are the different APIs? What are some of the standards they're using, and things like that. And the third is you want to prevent bad actors. You need runtime protection that inspects API traffic, right? So essentially, when you look at API security in itself, it's not one and done. It's multiple levels of security that you need. So that in turn introduces the best practices that we feel are important as you take an approach to securing your APIs, right? And these are the three sets of best practices, and all the three best practices are based on the foundation of zero trust security. And what I mean by that is trust nobody, right? And then secure everything. So that's kind of like the basic premise of zero trust security. Now, when you think about each of these best practices, what I'm going to do in the next step is kind of walk you through each of these best practices, and then the product and capabilities from MuleSoft and Salesforce that help you with that. So let's take the first best practices about API protection in itself, right? And the idea behind this is access and authentication to your API itself. So simple things, right? Who can access your API? How many times you can access that API? And what data from that API can be accessed and who can access that? Whatever I'm saying is actually seems it's very, very logical, very easy, but it's very, very easy to forget to do this oftentimes. Like the vulnerability use cases that we saw earlier with Optus, as well as with T-Mobile, have symptoms of this one way or the other, right? So for example, when you talk about access of how many, like when you look at identity, identity is at the heart of any security, right? So if you think about this, who can I like authentication of an API, right? Allowing who can access your API in the first place. Second is authorization. So like, okay, once you allow access to that API, what data from that API can be accessed? So for example, you can say that certain group of people can access this set of data and only other set of group of people can access all set of data. Applying the rate limits, right? So for example, when you look at cases like denial of service attack, you don't want your API to be hit multiple times, right? How do you stop that? And defining client contracts, like what can a particular client call that API for? Now, we often see that API gateways are a common way to implement access and authentication. From a MuleSoft perspective, we last year we launched Anypoint Flex Gateway, part of our universal API management offering. And Anypoint Flex Gateway is a ultra-fast distributed API gateway to control and secure APIs. You can deploy it virtually into any environment. It can be part of your CI/CD lifecycle. It's high performance and a small footprint allows you to secure east-west as well as north-south traffic, and it comes with fine-grained traffic control. So now, as you're developing your microservices, you can now easily control it using Flex Gateway. Flex Gateway works with Anypoint API Manager, and Anypoint API Manager, think about that as a centralized control plane to now configure and manage your API. So Anypoint API Manager is where you can configure your policies, you can configure your API access, and Flex Gateway is where you can actually now control it in a distributed fashion, right? But also with Anypoint API Manager, you can get analytics on your API. So now you can actually make smarter API program investments. So think about this. Flex Gateway for the API gateway and API manager for more the centralized control plane allows you to now provide you the first best practice of access and authorization. The second best practice is about API governance, and this is all about applying best practices and standards to your APIs. Now, what we mean by API governance here is essentially applying the guardrails within your organization to use your APIs properly, right? For example, you can define your best practices, you can define standards adhering to your industry best practices or your own company defined best practice. And you want to make sure that as the APIs are developed or as the APIs are consumed, most of them align with those best practices, right? So in a way, then you can consistently apply the governance across all your APIs, right? And that's what an API governance means. And oftentimes, this kind of becomes like a tussle between the security teams and the development teams. But the whole idea behind API governance here is that you can shift left with security. So as you're developing, this is just part of your development life cycle itself, right? So for example, you can put rules like the common API, common sets of rules like OWASP API top 10, which is kind of like a guided help for you to implement that security, right? Design time guidance to help developers build conforming APIs, and then some kind of a dashboard that allows you to then look at for all the APIs that you have, which are the APIs that are conforming, giving you the reports, and then allowing you to down notify your developers whose APIs don't conform. So this is where Anypoint API governance, which is again another capability, a new product capability that we launched last year, part of universal API management will help. It allows developers and security team to come together and work together to maintain compliance and speed. So two levels, right? If you're a security team or an admin, you can now set your rules. You can say, okay, these are a set of rules that all my developers should follow. You can then look at Exchange, which is basically a catalog of all your APIs, to look at all the APIs that conform to him, to those rules. For a certain set of APIs that don't conform, you can then notify the developers. At the same time, you can get like a dashboard to look at all your APIs. Similarly, if you're a developer, then as you're developing your APIs, as you're designing your APIs, you basically then say, okay, load those rule sets as I'm developing, and now I get guided help to know how my APIs are conforming and how I can actually fix them. So this is kind of a way by which both the developers as well as the security teams can actually work together to now implement API governance. So really excited about API governance. Is like, getting really good traction about API governance in the market, where a lot of customers are adopting API governance today. Then it brings me to the third best practices. So we spoke about access and authorization as first best practice. We spoke about API governance as a second best practice. And that brings me to the third best practice about discovering and cataloging APIs. The idea behind this is, right, you're going to have APIs everywhere on MuleSoft platform, but also everywhere other places where you're developing your APIs, right? Your applications, your third-party applications, your partner applications, right? So now the thing would be like, and the discoverability of this API has become very important, right? The example that I gave about with Optus, in that case, like the API was there, but they didn't even know about it. They didn't even have a visibility into that API. This is where the API discovery helps, where a capability that we launch, Anypoint Catalog CL, API Catalog CLI, allows you to now use that catalog CLI within your application. You can put it as part of your CI/CD lifecycle, and then it's going to discover that API, extract it for its documentation, specification, and catalog it into Anypoint Exchange. So again, Anypoint Exchange again becomes your single, like a catalog for all your APIs, integrations, as well as automations. But now once you have it in one place, that kind of then becomes your pathway to governance and control, right? Because now once you have these APIs in one place, you can start applying rule sets about, okay, governance on those APIs. You can start now controlling those APIs. So that's kind of like an idea about API discovery. And what's going to happen is, right, everywhere in your environment, you're going to have what Anypoint API Catalog CLI does is allows you to discover known APIs. So these are like the APIs that you know, right? APIs within your applications that you know about. But you're going to always have cases where there are unknown APIs, right? APIs that you don't even know about, right? And so when you think about discovering, you need a comprehensive API discovery, right? To discover all your APIs and catalog them into one place, right? And this is where we partner with security providers like Salt and No Name to now discover unknown APIs. And again, idea behind this is once you bring those APIs into one place, Exchange, that's when you can start addressing those concerns like governance, managing and controlling those APIs, and kind of extracting more value from those APIs, but at the same time making sure that the API access and everything are secure. So that kind of like are the three key best practices: access and authorization, API governance, and then discovery and cataloging of those APIs. Now with that, what I'm going to do is hand it over to Sue, who's going to actually walk you through to an implementation of these best practices. Sue, off to you.
All right, thanks, Amir. I'll go ahead and share my screen. So just to walk you through the demo, basically what we'll be doing is seeing how you can implement those three best practices that Samir mentioned by first cataloging the APIs that I built outside of Anypoint platform to catalog it using the CLI, and then putting it into Anypoint Exchange, and then running those APIs through API governance to ensure that they are they meet conformance requirements for the organization. So in which case, I just created my own conformance rules for my org. But and then lastly, for API, using Flex Gateway to apply policies and ensure that, yeah, it's zero trust and that you need authentication, as well as applying the rate limit policy to it. So let's get started. So the first place we're going to go to is my coding environment. So It can really be anywhere that you prefer to code, but I prefer Visual Studio Code because it has a nice UI and allows me to code quickly with capabilities. But what's really neat about Anypoint Catalog CLI is that I have all these APIs that are built out in my GitHub repository. Um, and what I can do is I can run this one command that creates a descriptor file. And a descriptor file essentially pulls out metadata information for each of the APIs. So it doesn't just look at the home folder, but it actually drills down to the nested ones and then pulls out any RAML as well as OAS specs and now GraphQL specifications also. So we'll go ahead and pull in the version if it's specified in the file. If not, it will just default to version 1. And then what's neat after this is that, so this kind of gets you a quick start into creating that metadata file, but then you can go ahead and customize it, which is what I've done here. So I can put in a custom documentation. So if I create a markdown file, I can specify where it is. That is relative to my descriptor file, and then also put in tags and categories to be able to filter out different APIs. So one iteration that I did was I put tags as catalog for all of them to mark that, oh, these APIs were created outside of Anypoint platform, and I want to make sure certain governance controls are checked with it. But in my case, I have ones that just say security. And then, so because the tool is a CLI, as in we can utilize it in command line, we can easily incorporate this into our CI/CD pipeline. So what I've done is instead of, let's say manually hitting publish asset, I'm saying anytime I make any changes to my API, I want it to automatically publish it to Anypoint platform. And in this case, I'm using GitHub Actions. It's really easy to incorporate if you're already using GitHub repository as your, version control product. So then you just create a YAML file with all the information. And then once you commit changes to your repository, it will automatically go ahead and run this command. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to run this, but what I've done is beforehand in Anypoint platform, I've already gone ahead and cataloged my APIs. So as you all probably know, this is Anypoint Exchange, and I'm just going to select the security tag. So these are the ones that I've gone ahead and uploaded using Catalog CLI. And another pro about using the CLI is that I don't have to upload one API at a time. I can both upload multiple APIs in case, yeah. So if I go into shipping API, I have the markdown file that I created, but using what's already built into Exchange, it also creates all the auto documentation, saving developers time, and also allowing any users to be able to reuse the APIs because now they know what's in this API specification. And then you can also use the mocking service to go ahead and test it out. And one thing you might have noticed here is that this shipping API meets conformance. So in Exchange, you can get that view of conformance, whether or not it meets the governance conformance. But let's go ahead and see how I was able to set this up so that it automatically checks if the API is conformant or not. So from the menu, we'll go to API governance, and this is the dashboard. Okay, so this is a dashboard where you can see which APIs are getting tracked, what profiles are created, and each profile has essentially three main things that is trying to, or three main things that are part of it. So the first is what are the governance rules that I want to check against APIs, and then 2 is filtering it out based on tags, categories, and now if it's actually in production, if it's running. And then lastly, who's going to get notified when it doesn't meet conformance. So we'll go through each page together. So in the rule sets, MuleSoft already provides 8 out of the box recommended set of governance practices, but sometimes it might have more or less of what you need or what you're looking for your particular APIs. And so we also provide you the ability to go ahead and create custom rule sets. So that's what I did for this particular one, HTTP basic rule set. But you can go ahead and choose mix and match the different rules. And then here you can filter out the APIs. So once you create a profile, if there are new APIs that are uploaded into Exchange, if it meets this filter criteria, it will go ahead and automatically go ahead and check it against the rules that you have chosen. So basically, once you set it up, you can just leave it be and it will go ahead and do the work for you. So you can set up API types. I'm going to go ahead and check security. And one of the latest features that we have for governance is deciding if you want APIs with instances, so the ones that are currently being managed in API Manager. And you can choose production or sandbox, environment name. So I have one API that's currently being managed. So I'll go ahead and pick these 3 and then turn off notification, but you can choose between the person sending notification when it's non-conformant to the publisher or the contact or anyone else who might need that information. So I'll go ahead and create it. And it takes some time for it to run it against the criteria depending on the size your API specification. But once it's done, you can go into whether you can drill down to each of the profiles or look at a particular API. So the one that I want to look at right now is billing API. Oh, it disappeared. So for each API, you can drill down and see what rule it failed on, as well as send another notification if the first notification didn't get sent or it was ignored the first time. So then what's also really neat is that, let's say you're a developer who's designing your APIs through Design Center. We have governance capabilities built in, and then it will actually send you a recommendation saying, hey, this API meets this particular rule set criteria that was built on those profiles. And so then you can go ahead and add it. And if there are errors, you can see it in project errors. Here. So if I'm just using HTTP, it will send an error, and then it'll automatically update it. And you can basically just make sure that your API meets governance while you're developing your API instead of retroactively. And when you publish, if there is an error, so if it has a red error or a warning, it won't let you publish. But if it's an information, then you're able to publish to Exchange. So let's say that all of my APIs are now good to go and meeting conformance. Then this is where we can now go ahead and deploy it and connect the API specification to a backend. And so in API Manager, we can go ahead and create a new API. I've already gone ahead and already deployed a Flex Gateway into an Ubuntu machine that I have. But let's go ahead and see just how quickly you can get a gateway set up. So we provide Flex Gateway into different OS or environments that really works for you, giving you that flexibility to determine, do you want to deploy your Flex Gateway as close to your application as possible, or do you want some layers? So just however that makes sense for your organization, the Flex Gateway can handle that kind of architecture. So we provide these options, and for each of them, we give a step-by-step guideline that you can just copy and paste into your terminal. What I've done personally is make this into like a Jenkins pipeline, so that instead of spending each time copying and pasting, all I have to do is just click run and then just put in the gateway name and then it will run it for me. So that's one way that you can also further automate and ensure that your Flex gateway is up and running. So I will go ahead and select the gateway and select the shipping API. But you can also create a new API at this moment and upload any API specification that was built outside of the Anypoint platform or haven't yet been cataloged. And then this is where you put in your backend URL. So I'm just using a fake API that's out there, but this is where you would put in the URL for your endpoint. And you can set up different base path to route if you want to use one gateway for multiple APIs, and then also set up ports. So I've actually already gone ahead and ran this. So then I have the shipping API. And once I go into the settings, I can see the status and the key metrics. So Flex Gateway bulk uploads metrics to Anypoint API Manager, at, I believe at like 20-second intervals. So there is a little bit of delay, but it's pretty much real time. You can go see what the errors were, the policy violation, and whatnot. So with Flex Gateway, there is about 18 out-of-box policies that MuleSoft provides, and we're continually trying to add more based on user recommendations. So if there is one that is missing, please you can go ahead and request it through the ideas portal, and they'll go ahead and evaluate that ask. But I already have the basic authentication policy set up, but we can go ahead and add a rate limiting. And what's really neat about out-of-the-box policies is that it saves you time because you can just quickly configure it using the UI. So I'll go ahead and set it up and expose headers. So, and then with Flex Gateway now, you can reorder policies. And then, so if you want, let's say, rate limit to come in before basic authentication, which isn't recommended, you would want security first, but you can go ahead and change the orders that you want. So now that it's all applied, we can go ahead and test it out. So this is the URL. So if I send a request right now, it says HTTP, there's no context. So I'll go ahead and run it. And then in the headers, we can now see the rate limit remaining and the limits. And as you saw, I just applied this policy live, so there is no downtime. It will get applied. And so once it hits that limit, it will go ahead and say too many requests. So going back, yeah, so you just saw the 3 steps on how you can implement the best practices that Samir mentioned using Anypoint Catalog CLI, governance, and gateway. So I'm going to pass it back to Samir to close us out.
Awesome. So thank you. Let me share my screen back again. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. So thanks, Sue. So I think again, so what you saw was a demonstration of the three best practices using the MuleSoft products that I mentioned earlier in terms of the capabilities. Right now, if you follow this approach, then you are in a better shape or in a better position to have a comprehensive security, API security across your API portfolio. Right, looking at access authorization, looking at API governance, as well as looking at discovery and cataloging different APIs. So that's kind of like what we believe are some of the 3. It's again whatever we are mentioning is nothing revolutionary, nothing new, but oftentimes you see that we see it all the time that it's so because of the complexity of our architectures or our deployments that simple things like this are actually missed, and it's not intentional, but it's easy to miss them, right? Especially when you have so many APIs across your architectures, it's easy to do that, right? Similarly, you can have an API without, when oftentimes we see this so common that people like, we have API without any traffic limit on it, right? So it's like you have a public APIs and anybody can call it anytime, right? And it's just recipe for vulnerabilities right there itself, right? So we believe that, if you follow this methodical approach using those sets of capabilities from a API gateway to API governance to API discovery, you will be in a much better position for an overall API security. Um, Saying that, okay, we did this demos. So couple of key takeaways, right? As we kind of summarize this is, the first is API use cases are evolving. Um, Multiple use cases, technical initiatives to business initiatives, thereby requiring a need for increased API security. At the same time this is happening, the API security challenges are increasing due to fragmentation, sprawling of APIs, and increase in the attack surface area. Some of these attacks that I've shared earlier are actually very simple. They're not nothing like difficult about. I mean, when you actually understand what those vulnerabilities are, so they're like, yeah, I mean, we should have done that before, right? So the thing is like, how do you start? Review those best practices. We actually spoke about 3 best practices in the paper that we just published last December. We have 5 security best practices. We will talk also about runtime protection, data protection, as well as some other aspects about security. Now, implement universal API management on a unified platform. The capabilities that we mentioned about, all the way from gateway to governance, taking care of the design to implementation to runtime, as well as discovery of API catalog, CLI, API manager, and utilize our technology partners, No Name Salt Security, as well as our SI partners with their methodologies to implement end-to-end API security. So again, with that, we have a lot of resources available for you to understand this topic further. The first thing first, we have a World Tour New York coming on May 4th. If you're in the area, please do come attend. We'll be talking about this topic and various other topics at that event. It's a one-day event, so really excited about it. So check it out. Um, Check out the best practices white paper, as well as try out the product. We have a 30-day free trial. I mean, as you already know, you can try out this product for 30 days for free, try out the different capabilities. A lot of the demos that Shu mentioned and showed you earlier, we have it all available as tutorials. So, take a look at it around it. And again, open to your feedback and participation as part of the MuleSoft community also. So again, thank you. With that, I think probably Sue, best would be like if we open it up to questions. If you have any questions that we could answer.